That's it. Without further ado, Mark, you want to take it away?
Sure. Good afternoon. So just want to talk a little bit about, I guess, who I am and why this is of great interest in my city. You know, in the city of Boston, you know, I just want to come forward and say that, you know, we are not by nature anti-technology. We're certainly not anti-business. We're not anti-app. But most sort of importantly to me is what I am is I am pro-consumer. I am pro-neighborhood. I am pro developing systems that take care of all riders in my city. And in so much as technology and specifically these apps become a tool, as I think we sort of all realize that they're going to be, for making sure that we as regulators stick to our mission, which is to keep, obviously, people safe, to deliver in a timely and professional manner the service to all of our citizens and visitors. I think that we can develop a partnership, really, and that we can sort of skip over all the rough edges and really get down to the work that it's going to take to bring really all the pieces together. So I am really here to listen and to learn. And one thing I am learning is that this is a landscape that is changing, if not daily, weekly. And it's very, very difficult, I think, for government sometimes because I don't know if people realize it, but government does not move at the quickest pace. Let's just put it that way. And these folks that have come to us today in terms of the technologies are moving at what I would consider to be breakneck pace. And one of our, I think, our real challenges is not only do we not speak the same language at times, we also do not work on the same scheduling. And to try to bring this all together in a format that we can all, you know, get down to the point where, as I say, I believe is inevitable, and deliver good taxi service across America, I think that's the task of the day.
All right. So I'm not going to get offended that Boston beat the Colorado Rockies a few years ago in the World Series, and I'll just say we agree with everything you just said. Matt, we'll give you just the quick answer to your question. We agree with model regulations completely. We think they are terrific. What do we want to bring to the table? Let me tell you about the conversations we're having in Denver, which is to take the model regulations, to go to our state friends, the Public Utilities Commission, and say, please take these on. Please adopt them. We think they're great. But what do we want to bring to the table in addition to that? Let me tell you about the conversations we're having. And that is not just within the Department of Excise and Licenses, because we regulate taxis as well as liquor and pedal cabs and marijuana, medical marijuana and alarm systems and 180 other different categories of licenses. We've got a lot on our plate. But what can we do to take the model regulations and what the consumer wants from the taxi cab industry and all of the other passenger transportation for hire issues and move it to what the consumer wants? And so what we're working on right now is a partnership among the City and County of Denver, our department, our Taxi Advisory Council, the State Public Utilities Commission, our Convention and Visitors Bureau, Visit Denver, as well as other stakeholders to create, in essence, a multi-stakeholder MOU all about apps for all of the modes of transportation. The analogy is the old version. Think of when you pull up to the airport, in Denver at least, you've got to be registered with the airport. You've got to have a special permit. There's a quota system. All of the cab companies that come in have to be, they've got a system for which drivers can come through there. They've got to have a special license. I used to be the chair of the board of the Colorado Nonprofit Association and in the Secretary of State's office. If you are a nonprofit and you raise money in the state of Colorado, we don't stop you from raising money. In fact, we want to encourage you from doing it, but you have to be registered with the Secretary of State's office. We are talking about doing the same kind of thing, of having, in essence, some kind of MOU that creates a platform, a joint platform where whatever you want to come in and do, whether it has to do with taxis or pedal cabs or limos, whatever it is, you can do it. All of these ones that you want to do, but you've got to register with us because we want to assure there's accountability. We want to assure that there is safety and fairness and openness about what all of the processes are, and it is a place where all of the regulatory bodies that touch all of these aspects, that there is all of the stakeholders that are involved, whether it is the Downtown Denver Partnership or the Convention and Visitors Bureau, whether it is local officials, whether it is individual groups that want to start something, that they all have access to it, and at the end of the day, the consumer wins. But can we, in essence, create this joint platform? Think of a virtual iPhone where anyone can apply their app, but they've got to register with us. That's the conversation we're having right now. So, Matt, our short answer is yes to the regulations, but what can we do to come together among all of our stakeholders? We already have the format for us. We've already had the group that's put together. We're talking through exactly what it's going to look like.
John Scott, San Diego. We also support the technology of the apps. Our concerns come from, we want to, again, do a partnership, but it involves the regulator, the owner, the driver, and the people that are riding the taxi cabs. That's our concern, is to enact regulations that ensure that the local transportation providers involved in all aspects of arranging the transportation so that the passenger has a place to go. So that's what I'm here to learn today, and that's going to be our main focus.
Well, thank you. My name is David Yaski. I'm from the New York City Taxi Limousine Commission. We are right now in the middle of a rulemaking process to provide for smartphone apps as a way for people to get a taxi cab. And I want to, I guess, start by thanking Matt and IATR for the tremendous work on these model rules and all the kind of thought that went into that. Obviously, every jurisdiction is going to have to adapt things to fit their own particular needs, but having this this kind of standard behind you, I think will be enormously helpful. When we looked at it, we see that for our yellow taxis, and we have in our city a distinction between yellow taxis that can pick up off the street and serve mostly Manhattan, and livery cars and black cars that cannot pick up off the street. And in the livery and black car world, there are already apps that people are using today. So for us, it's really an issue of bringing the yellows into that system. And as I say, we're in the middle of a rulemaking that will allow us to do that, which we expect to complete by the end of the year. Thank you.
In Los Angeles, we have ongoing programs where we do enforcement against bandit town cars, what are called black cars in most other areas. And we impound about 1,000 of them a year with 30-day seizures. We make about 1,000 arrests a year. That's with investigators that work under my supervision, working closely with LAPD. I just want to, that's leading up to what I'm going to say. In LA, our taxi market is primarily phone order based, with the exception of occasional peak demand times. Passengers get reliable service from their requests for service more than 91% of the time. So basically 91% of the time plus, you make a call for a taxi in LA, you're going to have a cab appear at your house or place of business or wherever else you made that call. So I'm making the point that there is no gap to be filled in Los Angeles for phone order service that needs to be filled by these apps that I can see. But I'm very concerned that the apps are using some of our illegal operators, or there's certainly a lot of potential for it, to basically cherry pick the good trips, the trips for affluent folks, people who are not disabled or anything like that, and who are going to be picked up at night spots or at the hotels for airport trips and things of that nature. And these are all operators that skate by the regulations the legal operators have to adhere to for operating in all over the city of Los Angeles, providing service for disabled folks, not to mention all the other requirements we have for green taxis and mandates for driver background checks, drug testing, and all those other things. Earlier this week, the California Public Utilities Commission issued a $20,000 fine against 3 mobile app companies, citing them for operating as carriers, not just as dispatching entities, but actual carriers, which they're supposed, that's how they're supposed to operate in the state of California. And this is very unusual for the California Public Utilities Commission. They don't issue a whole lot of fines. They don't do a lot of enforcement. And I felt this was very significant. So there's a lot of interesting things going on here. Like everyone else, I'm here to learn further about how this is all supposed to work. But you know, I've been in the regulatory business now over a quarter century, and I've seen a lot of things come and go. I'm curious to see how this is all going to play out, and actually where things are going to be even 5 or 10 years from now. You know, who knows? There'll be technological developments we can't even imagine coming to the forefront. Because 10 years ago, who could have imagined what we have now? So, but with that, I'll be quiet.
Hi, Benoit Jugan from Montreal. As for Montreal, it's a fairly new thing that's happening with the app company. We only have one app company in Montreal for the last 6 months, but our regulation needs to be adjusted. We already regulate dispatching company, so for us, dispatching company is well regulated, but as for the app company that comes in, we want to be sure that they follow the rules that we already set up. So Montreal is open to new technology, but within regulation. And as always, public safety will come first when we think about new regulations. Also, we want to be sure that consumers pay the same price, either if they book with an app company or if they take a taxi from the street. So it should be the same price for everybody without any extra charge. And we want to be also sure that it's going to be fair for all of our customers, disabled people, consumer must be able to get in a taxi and must be able to ask for a taxi within the app application. So we want to be sure that each company that comes to Montreal will respect what the consumer wants and the regulation that is set. So with that being said, if any company wants to come and work in Montreal and do some business in Montreal, we welcome those companies to come and meet us before starting their company or starting to ask either drivers or dispatching company to come and work. So we can work it out all together and work on a regulation that's going to be good for both parties. Thank you.
Carlton Thomas, Austin, Texas. I can only echo the thoughts and concerns mentioned by my fellow panelists here, and it can't be said enough that as regulators, we love technology and encourage innovation. We support the model regulations and look forward to moving towards implementation. And I'd also like to thank everyone who signed up to speak, and we look forward to hearing, listening to your testimony. And that's, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank the App Committee. we put a lot of work into this. Ideally, we'd have liked to have gotten these model regs out a week or so before, but obviously we had the storm. Our offices were actually closed because they're across the street from that crane. But we did get it done. But it's just the beginning. And I want to thank the members personally because there are jurisdictions on the committee, but it's everyone that's basically on the table, but also Marcy Cardona from Austin, Ashwini Shabra from New York City, who also worked on behalf of Commissioner Yaski. We also had Christiane Hayashi. We can't fit everybody up there, but she's speaking tomorrow from San Francisco. Rosemary Crimble from Chicago. Commissioner Crimble, thank you for your help and your insight. Also Craig Lacey, who couldn't be with us today. Ron Linton, Carl Mortimer from Australia, who also couldn't make it, as well as Richard Muka, Jim Nye, and Tina Paez, as well as John Barton and Don Onweiler. So thank you for all of your help. Just to reiterate before we start actually receiving testimony, of course, I have my stopwatch on my iPhone, just like I'm having iPhone issues. Somebody's telling me something somewhere. It went dead. So if anybody has a stopwatch on an iPhone that you could lend me, we'll just start it, in a rote way. But everybody's got 3 minutes. But I think we have not too many speakers, so we'll just try to estimate the time frame. You can fax your comments up for another month, up until I think the 15th of December, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, December 15th. Oh, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Up until the 15th of December, you can send your comments in written. We'll take them, we'll massage them, we'll look at them before we issue our final report. You can email them to me. The information's on page 2. So without further ado, I'd like to go to the public hearing and call our first speaker, which is Ron Beret from the city of Thunder Bay. Ron, are you here?
We're from Canada. Anyways, having reviewed the document and having heard the preamble and a lot of the talking today was about partnership, working together, I'm quite concerned about the document you created as an example, so to speak, that you don't consider a quasi-judicial system in dealing with violations. It seems pretty dogmatic the way this document's written, and I'm an enforcer, I'm an ex-police officer. In fact, in Montreal I used to work, and I'm quite, I just want to bring to your attention something I would certainly want to consider. If you're talking about partnership and having the cab companies create this document with you, that was my understanding, that you look at more of a quasi-judicial board, and I'm representing the Police Services Board for the City of Thunder Bay here, and the Chief of Police in the past, and again, IATR is helping us revise our bylaw. It's a great work in progress, actually. As why should the Chief of Police have all the say in passing or adjudicating matters dealing with violations under a bylaw, and why are we bringing these matters before a court of law, which are backed up 1.5 years anyways. You're not going to get much done before your courts. That you do consider a quasi-judicial system made up of a committee, a licensing committee like many of my colleagues in Ontario have for business bylaws, such as having a representative from the taxi company sit on that, a representative from the City of Thunder Bay sit on that, perhaps a politician for your city sit on that, and adjudicate matters and have things like suspensions, revocations. Anyways, these are matters that we have in our business bylaws across Ontario, where you keep it out of the court system, you deal with it. At the end of the day, you can still use the court system, don't get me wrong. If you do have a certain violator, that's a repeat offender. But that's one thing I would ask that the committee consider when you look at something like this, the quasi-judicial system, and using again the natural system of justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. And thank you for working with the ITR. Does anybody have any comments on that?
I think that's a great comment. One of the great things about model regulations is that you adapt them for whatever your own regulatory structure happens to be. Again, in different jurisdictions, there are commissions, authorities, or split jurisdictions as there are with us. So some, you have no choice but to go directly to a court, and that's the flexibility that's given with these model regulations. And so I think when Matt was leading this effort, that was the idea here. For us, we take that, but I read that as an either or. For for us, we would do exactly what you were saying, and we have a quasi-judicial structure that's already is already set up for our regulatory structure. So we read this as an either/or, and so the answer to your question is absolutely, and we would adopt these model regulations for the structure we already have, which includes a quasi-judicial structure.
All right, thank you, and I would echo that. These aren't intended to be the entire set of regulations. They're intended to work in conjunction with existing administrative procedures that are in your rules, and so if you engage in surge pricing, that's an overcharge. Some jurisdictions you can get a fine, and some jurisdictions you could also have mandatory revocation, like in New York. So it's a good point, but these are just like provisions that are intended to be dumped into your and molded into your general regulations. And the industry didn't write these, okay? They didn't. We got their comments. The app committee and the firm wrote them and come up with them. But we gave it to the TLPA, and Al and his app committee looked at it, and I think that's a critical piece of information that we need to see how the industry views our definitions. And also TLPA has been working on this for a gazillion years, legislation, they've studied this issue, so it's input that I think is well worth it. Our next speaker is Tim Santos.
It's nice to be here. I actually think of the app companies, which we really prefer to be called technology companies, that I personally may have been at IATR the longest of anybody here in the room of the app companies. So it's nice to be here. We've been around since 2007, and looking up there on the panel, I think we work in all of the cities that you all represent. We work with full service fleets. We work in 50+ cities, 100+ fleets across the nation, and we provide electronic booking tools, tracking tools, mobile payment, and backseat payment devices in a handful of the cities that are up there. I know in Denver and in LA we do. And one of the other things that we've done is focused on accessibility. I know in New York, David, we participated with the Wheels on Wheels program to dispatch legally 250 wheelchair accessible cabs in New York, and that's something that we're very proud of. In looking at the regulations, we agree with just about everything, and I think we're fortunate that we started off focused on working on things the right way. But one question we have for the panel is on this concept of a dispatching license, that the app companies would need a dispatching license. I think you need to separate the companies that work with full service fleets who do the dispatching. What we do is we send a ride request to a dispatch system in a fleet. They then do the dispatching. We don't do any dispatching at all for those full service fleets, versus a direct to driver model that actually does the dispatching. So I don't know if that's been brought up, but I think that should be cleared up or discussed, because there's definitely a difference. You talk with the full service fleets, they do the dispatching. We work with dispatching partners, they do the dispatching. We send the ride request, versus a direct-to-driver app that picks the driver, that sends the cab, that does the dispatching.
I can speak for San Diego. You're absolutely correct. It does have to go through one of our dispatch services, and anyone who dispatches a driver directly would be a direct violation of our current regulations. They're not allowed to accept any calls from another dispatching organization, especially one that's not approved. So there is a distinction there, and it's in our ordinances we draw a very clear line.
Okay. Anybody else?
As for Montreal, it's the same as San Diego. If you go through a dispatching company, then it's legal to go that way. But if you pass it through the driver directly, well, there's two problems. One with the bylaw, with the regulation, and there's going to be a problem too with the dispatching company, because they want to have their customers too. And I'm not sure that our dispatching company will accept that taxi driver get direct calls from another company. So that's another problem that has to be addressed.
Thanks.
Okay. And just a point of clarification, I just make sure it's perfectly clear. It's either if you have jurisdiction to do a dispatch license and you want to do it, that's what the language is there for. If you don't want to do it that way, I think the committee has decided that you may want to just hold your existing licensees accountable for doing X, Y, and Z and not have them file for a new license, but just make sure that your existing licensees, like in New York, have to file information and disclose who their third-party apps are and make sure that the law is being abided by. So I think there's two different approaches. Chicago has, I believe, a dispatch license, right, Rosemary? So it really is just, one option. Okay, the next speaker is George Lutfala from Chicago.
Matt. All right, excuse me. I'm George Lutfala. I publish the Chicago Dispatcher and the Taxi Cab Times. I'm in a bit of a unique situation in that one of my oldest and biggest customers is currently suing one of my newest and biggest customers. So, and it's over this very issue. But I wanted to relate a story, if I may, real quickly about what happened to me a couple of weeks ago. And I was going to the TLPA show in Las Vegas. And I called for a cab. I called Yellow Cab. And I was first hooked up with an automated system that asked if I wanted to be picked up at my address. And I said, yes, or punch number 1 or something like that. Well, then a live operator came on the phone and said there were no cabs available, and did she want me to call, for her to call me back when the cab would be available? And I said, of course. I was starting to run a little late, and I was getting a little nervous. Well, the call didn't come, and I was waiting and waiting and waiting, and I downloaded Uber. And Uber had no taxis available in my area either, but they had a black car available. It was 24 minutes away. I ordered it. Then I got a phone call, and I assumed it was going to be Yellow, who was saying, okay, we found a cab for you. It wasn't. It was the driver of the Uber vehicle who said, hey, I'm 24 minutes away. Is that okay? Do you still want me to come? And I said, yes, of course. And I told him I was in a hurry. He got there a minute early, and I got to see the vehicle as it, on the GPS as it approached. Now, with some other apps, some of the ones that go through the companies, and I'm not knocking them, I understand the arguments for those, but for some of those other apps, you don't necessarily get the closest cab. You might get the closest cab in that particular fleet because it's going to first go to a fleet. It's not going to necessarily pick the closest cab in general. Well, anyway, the guy got there on time. I got to the airport on time thanks to him. And while I was en route to the airport, then I got the call back from Yellow who said, we still don't have a cab for you. Anyway, I got to the TLPA and got to hear about how awful Uber is when I got to Las Vegas. One other point I'd like to make about that is some of the points made in Las Vegas at the TLPA convention about the rogue apps were some owners, I heard from several operators saying that if there are problems with that cab driver, something goes wrong with that cab driver, who are they going to call? They're going to call me. Well, I think that's kind of a silly argument because with the exception of probably Las Vegas, the first thing that happens when there's an accident is the owners disavow that driver. They don't know that driver. They say that that's an independent contractor and we're not responsible for that accident. So I don't know that that argument holds water. But what I do think is a good argument is if I drove here. I drove here and from Chicago. And the first thing I did with my phone is I paired it with the vehicle so that I could be hands-free and talk through the speakers in the car. Well, one of the problems with, say, an Uber, or maybe even a Halo, is that that driver can take that device and not pay a lease on a cab and go pick up the person in their private car or something that looks like a cab or something that looks like a sedan, but it might not even have insurance. And how is the passenger going to know that? They might not necessarily know that, right? So,
George, could you try to sum up or wait?
Yeah, I'm going to sum up right now. I just think that it makes a lot of sense with the Uber types of models, with Halo or Uber, if they could somehow pair it with that particular vehicle so that you know that the passenger's getting into a licensed and insured cab. It makes all the sense in the world and to me. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Charlie King.
Thank you. I'm Charlie King. My organization's a fleet operator in the suburbs of Northern Virginia. We operate under a public convenience and necessity environment. Our company, like Bill Rouse's company and many other TLPA members, are early adopters of technology. We're by no means anti-app. We've utilized apps for some time now. We also happen to be one of the larger providers of wheelchair accessible taxi cab service in the United States, at least that we're aware of. And in one of our jurisdictions has been done for 15 years, totally under a voluntary system without a mandate, just by way of introduction. I don't feel qualified to comment on the specifics of the proposal. I've only become familiar with it over the last week, and I've seen that over the last week, its iterations have improved in some area, or been cleaned up in some areas. So I know it continues to be a work in progress. I'm about to be a little bit redundant, I think, listening to some of the committee members and some of the other speakers. I guess I don't know if this is more to inform the process of developing a regulation, other than perhaps as a point of emphasis, or if it's intended for regulators who may be tempted to try, or maybe trying to implement this later and may succumb to temptation, if you will. I would simply encourage both that the model ordinance and the implementation of the model ordinance, that you people, if you'll forgive the old country expression, dance with who brung you. If you develop a local regulatory system, in our case PCNN, some places use a franchise system, systems that are designed to ensure service to all elements of the community, including low income, seniors, and people with disabilities, then don't uproot that in the interest of doing something new in order to accommodate apps coming into your market in a regulated fashion. I will second the comments of some of the speakers about implementing those applications in such a way that they support and work through the existing certificated carriers who have borne those responsibilities over the years. If the choice is between setting up a new regulatory regime or a new license of for entree into the business, in the, if you'll forgive me, naive hope that outside entity will provide the same full service coverage that an established company does, because of the nature of those applications, that's not going to happen. They're going to inherently be discriminatory, and all it's going to do is weaken the existing companies unless you set them up in a structure so that they work through the existing certificated carriers. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Norma Reyes.
I do not have substantive comments at this time of the proposed model rules because unfortunately I did not have the opportunity to really review them in depth and discuss them with some of my colleagues. But I can assure you we will review them and provide you with the comments by December 15th. But I would like to make a couple comments as a former regulator and now as a stakeholder in the industry that is highly, highly, highly regulated by the various jurisdictions that are represented here. Taxi apps are not new. Taxi apps are not new. Taxi apps are not new. They have been with and have been serving this industry for some years. What is new, however, are apps that have totally bypassed the current regulatory schemes that exist in many jurisdictions today. Regulatory schemes that exist today. Matt mentioned earlier when he opened up this session early in the morning on rogue apps, he said that there have been a number of lawsuits filed against rogue apps, and that frankly it's a lengthy process, and so that is why we have these model rules, or that you propose the model rules. I mean, he's right. Litigation is a lengthy process, and I can assure you that the companies that are involved in litigation would rather not be in litigation, would rather that the regulatory bodies that have existing regulatory schemes that have no problems in enforcing those with the existing companies that are there that you have regulated for years, that if you enforced your existing regulatory schemes, then we would not have to litigate. And in fact, what we could be doing is spending those precious dollars to do the things that you ask us to do every day, and that is to purchase new vehicles, to purchase wheel-accessible vehicles, more efficient, green taxis, better training, provide all those things that we need to come and to provide better service for the consumer, for the driver, and for everyone that we service. We do not want to be spending, I can assure you, hundreds of thousands of dollars in litigation. And The last thing I just want to say is, although I think the proposed model rules is a wonderful beginning, it's a starting point, I don't believe it's the end game, and I welcome, obviously, I really appreciate all the work that you've put into this, and I'm glad that you're giving us the opportunity to send you comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma. The next speaker is Neil Sage. Neil from the Victorian Taxi Association and the Australian Taxi Industry Association. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President. Oops. I wasn't expecting to be asked to do this, but I will. And now I know who you are. It's said that there's nothing more useless than a taxi without a driver, but that's a debate for another day. It's also said that it is useless to have a taxi without a passenger. So the question is how the taxi industry can attract more taxi passengers or more passengers. Taxi apps are the new but an additional way for drivers and customers, passengers to connect or to be connected. It is true to say that taxi networks have been the leaders in adopting new technology to improve service delivery and to improve their own and their fleet's productivity. Having said this, it is absolutely critical that any arrangements have to work in a way that maintains and indeed improves driver safety and passenger safety. For this reason, the Australian taxi industry believes that apps need to work through existing networks and not be something that is just out there in cyberspace. And keeping in mind, and I think somebody else said it, that the brand of the taxi network is on the side of the vehicle, so if something goes wrong, it isn't going to be the app provider that is being held accountable. It is going to be the taxi with the brand on the door. I can only support the view of Matthew Belizia this morning from MT Data. He lives in Melbourne too. He expressed this morning that networks need to develop their own apps or work with third-party providers, so we certainly agree with that. Importantly, rogue apps have the potential for any vehicle, and this has been spoken about, any vehicle with any driver to pose as a taxi. The reality is this must not be allowed to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Next speaker is Al Agassi from the TLPA. And also, I just want to, as Al comes up, recognize that we have the incoming president, Bobby Worth, here, as well as a former president, Judy Sestwin. And also, I apologize if I didn't thank you enough, but Jim Bell was, I believe, the chair of the App Committee. So we worked very closely with him, and thank you for all your hard work. Al?
Hi. First of all, we applaud you and your efforts, the committee, the App Committee of IATR, and we appreciate your leadership in addressing this issue. I really can't give formal comments on the proposal. As several people have mentioned, it just came out a few days ago, and we have a process we have to go through. But I think it's an excellent first step, and I applaud you on also giving us more time, everybody more time to comment. But as today proceeded, I jotted some notes from the earlier panel, the app technology folks, and now this panel. And it struck me, first of all, we all want to give safe, economical, reliable, comfortable, and community-wide service. Well, I say all, but of course several of the app vendors don't do that at all. But what struck me was, and I represent fleets, so I have a bias, a natural bias to fleet operators, fleet managed service. And where we heard app vendors talking about going to drivers direct, and then we heard from London the value of app because it brought some management to these disorganized drivers who have no management because they have no fleet systems in place. They have no infrastructure to support the service they provide. But for the industry for most of the industry, outside of really a handful of cities. It is a fleet-managed industry. Now, sometimes the fleets are more smaller fleets and great numbers, but LA, for example, was talking about 9 major fleets servicing a major city and doing such a good job that he didn't think apps had a market there. Whether they have a market there or not really isn't the question. The question is, how do you deliver service to passengers? And I think you deliver it through fleets as the most optimal way. A good regulation that requires the fleet to deliver good service to the passenger is the way to go. So with an app, the app does part of what a fleet does. It matches passengers with drivers. It matches wealthy passengers with drivers, but it doesn't match anybody else with drivers, or the rogue apps, let's say. But most apps target, I mean, if you have to have a smartphone to use the app, they're only 50% of society has those smartphones, so the other 50% are lower income and don't have those smartphones. So they market to the wealthy and they deliver service for the wealthy. But what do the rest of the fleets do? I mean, that's the one fleet function an app's doing, but are they maintaining vehicles? Are they inspecting the vehicles? Are they making sure when an accident's happening? Are they risk management? Are they implementing driver training, defensive driving courses? Are they managing those claims? Is there service oversight? You know, we service hotels, we service airports, we have specialized contracts to deliver service to the elderly and the disabled. We have school contracts, we have guaranteed ride home. We do all kinds of programs that the app vendors, at least at this point in time, aren't doing and aren't likely to do, because those are all items that drive your overhead up. And they're squeezing the margin down. They're trying to maybe make the fleet superfluous, those that choose not to work with fleets, make this fleet superfluous. And you can do that with an owner-driver, but with an owner-driver, you're never going to get these other services that the industry is best known for and delivers better service to the public. No driver training, no taxis on patrol program, no charitable involvement, no getting drivers out on holidays or late at night or in bad weather. You know, not all drivers choose to come out. The fleets make the calls. They rally the troops to get them out when the public needs service. An app's not going to be able to do that, but we do that. And bulk purchase. We bulk purchase vehicles, tires, parts, meters, what else? Communication systems. We do lots of things that an app can't do. I would say if you would manage your industry through fleets, you would do better as regulators. The public would get better service, and you can hold us accountable. We'll resist. I mean, you know, we're humans. We'll resist being held accountable, but you can hold us accountable. We will do it, and we'll give good service. But if you cannibalize the industry or you disaggregate us, you make us independent owner-drivers through apps, you're seriously lowering the quality of service. And where you have that, New York City being the best example, you have to have such a huge regulatory bureaucracy, and somebody's got to pay for that. You know, you can do that through fleets if you have fleets.
Okay.
That's what I would say.
Thank you, Al. The next speaker is Mr. Bill Owens.
I will never have a seat at the TLPA table. Standing adjacent to it is as close as I'll ever get. Yes, I wanted to recognize our past, Mr. Doss, and pay you a compliment. When I left New York, I think your title was still General Counsel. I've missed your entire tenure as chair, but you've had that tenure, and you come from a finer tradition of New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission chair, the ones who've not been convicted for what they did while their tenure as chair. I compliment you.
It's a long life, Bill.
Yes. Yet. Maybe I should have said yet. Who knows? I've not read the model regulations. I'm sure they read well. I've not read rogue apps. It seems to me there's probably not an application for everything, but you know, an application is an application. Some things in life, it might be beneficial to have an application. Some things not necessarily. But this is only the second meeting of the IATR I've ever had the privilege of attending. It was still called Taxi Regulators then. I don't know why we must glorify ourselves. When I first knew these folks, they were still the National Taxi Cab Association, but we seem to want to do that. But in Montreal, approximately 20 years ago, I made the suggestion, naively possibly, that an appropriate function for the International Association of Taxi Now Transportation Regulators would be to regulate the industry from an economic perspective, which is not really done. I would ask, it's rhetorical, no one has to answer it, but how many people in this room today, or members of the association, ever actually made a living driving a taxi cab? If you have, I applaud you. For how long? I would look to talk to you later and discuss this, but the fact is that this is an association that's grown, it's evolved, all things evolve, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. But this really is more a trade association. You all are in the industry, or you vend to the industry, or you want to vend to the industry, or you don't want to be regulated by the regulators, or if you do, you want beneficial regulations. The crux of my argument 20 years ago, actually many years earlier than that in New York, is that there's only two crucial things that should be considered in any economic model of this industry. And that is what's in the interest of the driver, so that the driver's only concern is the passenger, and the interest of the riding public. And all considerations, whether it be new technology or new applications of old technology, should revolve around those two things. The interests of the actual people doing the work, not the people who own the product that the people are working. I apologize. But the people doing the work and the riding public.
Bill, could you sum up? Or for the
I just concluded, actually.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Dr. David Cousins.
Thanks, Matt. I was also leaned on to say something about framework for assessing this issue. So I've been involved with the Victorian inquiry. I'm not speaking on behalf of the inquiry. It's some personal comments I suppose I'd make. Firstly, I think it's a good thing that the regulators are looking at this issue. It's one that is rapidly evolving. We did look at it a little in the inquiry, and I'll say something about what we said about it. But by way of broad framework, one thing I think I'd urge people, and again, I haven't read the document either, and I don't know what work has gone behind the document. But the first thing we would ask is, what is the problem? Let's be very clear about what the problem is, and let's avoid the common trap of jumping to solutions, particularly regulatory solutions, before we've really understood the problem. So we would look, I suppose, at this from a best regulatory practice approach. Let's identify the problem. What are our options for dealing with the problem? One of those has been mentioned earlier. Let's really enforce our existing law. For example, if we are worried about unlicensed traders, let's really get out and hammer them. If we're worried about contracts of adhesion, as was mentioned this morning, let's actually enforce our general law. Certainly in Australia we have an unfair contract terms law now. Maybe as regulators we should be looking at educating the public and the community about these new developments and so on. So there are lots of options, and then we'd look at what are the costs and benefits associated with those options. Let's choose the one with the greatest net benefits. So that's framework. Now, in terms of what we did in Victoria, we did have got a couple of apps, companies operating in Australia now, and we did have quite a look at one of their models that was applying. We took a view, basically, that this was a welcome development in terms of its impact on competition and innovation. We unfortunately concluded that the services provided by the existing networks and booking companies were really poor, and that's the view of the community generally. And what was happening was a reaction, if anything, to that. So the last thing we were going to do was stymie this new innovation. The industry put to us that we shouldn't do anything about apps. They should just be, if you like, confined for a period of 5 years with the existing networks until we found out how they worked. That was just reinforcing an existing problem. So we were very much in favour of promoting this new development. When we looked at the One App, what we found was, in fact, from a point of view of a safety issue, that this was a company that was actually vetting all the drivers that they were signing up. So they were actually providing additional safety protections for consumers over and above what were there already. So that was our general view on it. Thanks very much, Matt.
Thank you, David. The next speaker is John Nunziata.
Thank you. I'm from the City of Toronto, and I'm with Wheelchair Accessible Transit. The principal of Wheelchair Accessible Transit was the recipient of the IATR Lifetime Achievement Award last year in Toronto. His name is Alex Matrasoff. I guess the question is to regulate or not to regulate, and at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is the public interest. And the public interest can be defined in a number of different ways. The safety of drivers, the safety of the public. It seems to me that the underlying concern here is self-interest, the protection of the existing regime. There's concern about this revolution that's taking place worldwide in the taxi industry. At the end of the day, again, it's the public interest, and the public interest includes the entire public. There was some discussion here today about what percentage of fleets should be accessible. There's only one acceptable percentage of taxi fleets in the world that should be accessible, and that percentage is 100%. The ability to have on-demand metered accessible taxi service is a right. It's a human right. Should not be considered as an afterthought, whether it's in the regulation of apps or the regulation of the industry. And I'd like to take this opportunity to applaud the City of London and to the City of Philadelphia, where the regulators, where the industry understands what's fair, and that is 100% of every vehicle should be accessible. And that should, it seems to me, to be one of the primary objectives of regulators worldwide. By not providing that service to a growing number of individuals, and we know that that demographic is growing significantly as the population ages, we're creating an injustice. So the only message I'd like to leave, Matt, to you and your colleagues and all those who are considering regulation moving forward, that consider the public interest, but consider the entire public, and make sure that every app has functionality that would accommodate the disabled. And let's move towards a taxi system in every jurisdiction in the world that appreciates and understands the human rights and dignity of all individuals. And let's move towards 100% on-demand metered accessibility.
Thank you. We have 3 more speakers left. The next speaker is Jessica Goccioni.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I work with the Law Commission of England and Wales, and we're currently looking at reforming the licensing system for taxis and private hire vehicles, which is what you call limousines as well. I just had a brief look at the model regulations, and the comments are just my own and just first impressions. I was interested to see that they are limited to motorized vehicles. When we were looking at the scope of reforming the licensing laws, we took a broader approach to just any vehicle that transports passengers for hire. So, for example, things like pedicabs, sort of to bring them within the system. There's concerns that you have sexual offenses and assaults, so in those circumstances, the public is quite vulnerable. So that's something that we might want to consider in terms of the scope. Similarly, not just having, say, a limit of free doors, for example, would exclude things like motorbikes. And those can be quite popular to zip in and out of town. And it's just a concern to think, well, why are we regulating if safety is an issue? It's an issue regardless of whether the vehicle has wheels or things like that. So that's one aspect I found interesting. The other was the definition of prearranged journeys, because that's something we've struggled with. Some of you may be familiar with the antique concept of applying for hire, and that has been very criticized for being too broad brush and very difficult to pin down. But when you move to a more bright line rule, such as having a minimum fare requirement or a minimum time, I do worry about regulation injecting inefficiencies into the system and actually limiting the way that companies might, and the market might be best placed to decide, you know, what is a prearranged journey. So if you have a consumer that wants to pre-book a vehicle and the vehicle's 5 minutes away, to introduce a waiting time, an extra, say, 25 minutes of waiting time when there's a willing supplier and a willing consumer might provide, you know, quite controversial. And the additional worry would be that when there's a gap that is introduced by regulation, you're actually allowing the completely unlicensed and those people that are outside of the system to actually come in and fill in that demand. Because if I'm, say, waiting in the rain and, you know, I need a car and there might not be a taxi cab available, there are many outlying areas or late at night where you might not have sufficient provision of the on-demand taxi service where you rely on the pre-booked. And so if you inject these minimum fare requirements or minimum time, you might allow the cowboys to come along and just pick up without any license at all. And people, you know, they get quite desperate, you know, they might be quite drunk. The idea is you don't want to increase the scope for that. So that was something we struggled with a lot, because you don't want to have a system that no one understands or no one can define, but on the other hand, you don't want to stifle innovation and stifle good businesses from providing a really efficient service. So I think that's probably all I wanted to say. But thank you very much. It was really interesting.
Thank you, Jessica. The next speaker is Tarek Balla. Tarek?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I believe as an operator and an association member, it is always a wonderful thing when regulators and industry works together. And the progress of the IATR to allow operators to contribute is a great thing. How much can we affect, and how much you can convince you to regulate? And where do we see the role of regulators? And more important, where do they see themselves' role as a regulator? What is a regulator supposed to do? It is quite bewildering, quite amazing to me sometimes that a regulator will take on the responsibility of promoting a business, and another one would say, we're not here to protect your business. So it's for us, when you're writing these rules or considering our existence, it's always amazing, and you should be amazed on where do you think your roles are, where does it start, where does it end, who do you answer to, and who do you serve, and in which way you should do this. Mobile apps, as was said, is not a new thing. It's not a new thing. It's not a new thing. Absolutely correct. Not only mobile apps, not a new thing. Websites that do the same thing as mobile apps is not a new thing, and it does exactly the same thing. The only difference is I'm mobile. The other one, I'm sitting on my desk. So are you considering generating a separate entity that would be directories on the website, or referring services, or services that would reserve a car by you sitting on your desk through a website and make a reservation? I don't know. To me, the logical thing is to regulate the service providers. And anybody else should be either a service provider or not be allowed to do this work. But if you don't regulate them, you have no jurisdiction on them. I'm glad I'm not in your shoes, but I can definitely tell you it is the learning curve, or finding out that some companies will work or some entities will process and others will fail, or a business model will be good and another one is not, may leave a large number of hurt entities and broken down markets that even if we prevail with a traditional or a new innovative, but through traditional fleet ownership and fleet management, might still get hurt. Thank you.
Thank you, Tarek. Our last speaker is Andrew McDonald from Uber Technologies Incorporated.
Thank you. You know, as a consumer-focused technology company, we've obviously got a lot to say on the regulations put forth this weekend. You know, I think that there's a lot of topics to be debated, and frankly, there's a number of areas that Uber would disagree with what's being proposed. That said, there's probably a lot more than we can cover in 3 minutes. So we'd like to invite the regulators in the room from the cities we're in and the cities we're not to join us at 5 o'clock. We booked the Algonquin room just down the hall. Travis will have a few things to say on the topics. You guys can ask some candid questions, and we'll just have a frank discussion. So would love it if the regulators in the room could join us, and hopefully we'll see you at 5. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.